So the answer for our interactions is no.
You did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails. Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or
Yes.
anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party.
That was WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange on this program back in January, saying and denying that Russia had anything to do with giving WikiLeaks the hacked Democratic emails during the 2016 election. Now, this is important as we continue with the Executive Vice President of the Hill, John Solomon. I've interviewed him, as I said, 4 times on radio. I've interviewed him once on television. And here's an interesting sidebar. Whether you like WikiLeaks or not, and I know that at times Democrats liked him, at times Republicans liked him. But here's a guy that hacked into the DOD and NASA when he was 16. I think he's now 45. Now, at some point, we've got to say, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. Now, shame on America for not building the cybersecurity that they should have. And so there's a lot of angry people, which I understand.
Sure.
But they also have a responsibility. But 11 years, WikiLeaks has never gotten it wrong. So Rohrabacher, the congressman from California, meets with him.
Right.
And Julian is saying he's got the proof it wasn't Russia. And he would be the one guy, I think, in the whole world that would know more than anybody. So here's the question. Rohrabacher now has a message for the president. What did he tell you about that?
He said that he has some non-public information that Julian Assange gave him that he's going to take back to the president. He also had a request from Assange, which he was willing to talk about, which was Assange would like WikiLeaks to have a seat in the White House press corps. So there's a little horse trading going on in these negotiations.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing Julian Assange signal that he might be open to do some sort of deal. The question is the American government, is the Congress interested in doing such a deal with a guy who has brought a lot of harm to national intelligence sources from the information he's released? He's not a hero in the intelligence community, that's for sure.
I know he's not a hero in the intelligence community, but again, I go back to, you know, at some point, well, we saw how corrupt Hillary Clinton was. We learned an awful lot about what happened to Bernie Sanders, didn't we, in that whole mess? That that primary was rigged. There was a story with Debbie Wasserman Schultz because he got fired on the eve of the Democratic National Convention, right?
That's right. Yeah, no, listen, there's 3 things that Julian Assange over the last 10 years has brought to light. One, how penetrable our supposedly secure systems in government were, how easy it was to hack. 2, how much surveillance was going on of Americans that no one really knew about,
how
much more
Hillary is.
And then 3, the entire Democratic National Committee storyline where it looked like the party was trying to hamper the election opportunities of Bernie Sanders. And I think those are 3 storylines that are not in question. People recognize that WikiLeaks had a contribution to that. I did something before I came on tonight. I made a couple calls in the intelligence community. I had one interesting response I want to share with you, Sean. One of the big intelligence sources I talked to said, listen, we've said all along we're confident Russia did some hacking in the election. We didn't say they were the only ones that hacked. And I think that was the first sign, and any time I've talked to someone in intelligence, that there might be some room.
All right. What's really, I think, important, and it's interesting with Chelsea Manning now, and you factor that into this equation.
Right.
And I'd been to the Ecuadorian embassy. It's a tiny space. He's holding firm. He believes in his principles. He said to me that he says, I'm reporting things that people need to know. There is a real danger, and you and Sarah Carter are probably at the forefront of investigating this, and that is, I thank God for intelligence, as we saw in Barcelona earlier today, against ISIS and radical Islam and against Iran and China and Russia and all these countries. They're not our friends. They're not our friends, and we need to know about dangers that we may face. We give them the most powerful tools, but if those tools are turned against the American people and used against the American people illegally, because we have laws that prevent that, that's a very dangerous scenario. What about the IT guy of Debbie Wasserman Schultz that got 4 counts today charged with?
Yeah, very interesting, right? There's a lot we don't know in that case as well. But this is a gentleman that worked in the ID department, had access to congressional computers, congressional secrets, possibly her DNC email, and he's now been indicted on 4 charges, mostly related to bank fraud and other questions that have come up. But there's a lot of new information that I'm hearing in law enforcement circles that they're developing about what he did at day, at night, and I think they're looking at some possible connections to other activity besides the charges that were filed today. And I think we're going to learn a lot from the Capitol Police, the FBI, in the coming months about that case. That's a very open and uncertain question about what happened to Debbie Wasserman Schultz's emails.
It's going to be interesting to see what Dana Rohrabacher came back with, and I think the American people need to know the truth. And I'm calling on Robert Mueller tonight. He is investigating supposed collusion. He has a duty to find out what that information is, and the same thing with Congress. The Republicans are in charge. They have subpoena powers, investigative powers. They need to do their job, because this has been 11 months long, no evidence yet presented. Thank you, John Solomon. Keep up the good work.
Roger Stone, known to be a political dirty trickster, he calls this report a joke. The Republican strategist joins us live. Roger, great to have you with us.
Shannon, thanks for having me. You know, one of my rules, the only thing worse than in politics than being talked about is not being talked about. But at the same time, I remember Abraham Lincoln's story about the man who was being ridden out of town after being tarred and feathered on a rail. They asked him what he thought about it, and he said, well, but for the honor of it, I'd rather walk. This is a mainstream media mugging. Let's give you a quick etymology, if I may. The Washington Post first unearthed this story. Sam Nunberg, a very neurotic personality. When I worked with him for Donald Trump, he would sometimes call you 30 or 40 times a day. Often I would let his calls roll over to voice message and not talk to him, because usually it was just kind of, what do you know, what do you hear? I'm a busy man. Sam called late one Friday. I was trying to get him off the phone. He asked me what I was doing for the weekend. I said I thought I would fly to London, have dinner with Julian Assange. The Washington Post, by the way, misquotes me on that. Sam evidently believed this were true, and I would later milk the joke in an email, to which Sam responds when I said, Sam, pardon me, sent me an email showing Donald Trump trailing Hillary by 15, kind of sticking it in my face, because after Sam was fired, he was very anti-Trump. I remain a strong supporter of the president and will continue to do so. So this is the continuation of the same joke. The important thing here, I think, is to understand that my passport, airlines records, customs records, the surveillance cameras at the Ecuadorian embassy, where Assange has to be one of the most watched people in the world, would all demonstrate this meeting didn't really happen. And then I offered the Wall Street Journal, who, by the way, misquoted the email, an opportunity to see my passport, and they declined. I also produced airplane tickets and credit card receipts. It shows that I was in California in this period.
Okay,
so the answer is no, the meeting did not happen. What I find kind of amusing here is that I discussed this on InfoWars with Alex Jones on August 4th. CNN says that's a revelation because prior to that in their timeline, I had never pointed out that these revelations were allegedly, quote unquote, devastating.
Okay.
They said go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's talk about some other, because I know that you've provided boarding passes, credit cards, receipts, all those kinds of things. Now, you have said, though, August 8th, after this email exchange in 2016, you did say in a public speech, and I'll read a little bit of it, you said this: you were asked about an October surprise in Julian Assange. You said this: well, it could be any number of things. I actually have communicated with Assange. I believe the next tranche of his documents pertain to the Clinton Foundation, but there's no telling what the October surprise may be. Tell us what you meant there, what kind of communications you have or haven't had with Julian Assange, and why did you say it if it didn't happen?
Well, first of all, I testified about all of this under oath for 4.5 hours before the House Intelligence Committee. I asked that testimony be made public. They insist that they will not release it. So I answered all of these questions. I clarified that I used a confirming source a journalist who was in touch with Assange. He was communicating with Assange or Assange's attorneys.
So a middleman.
And had assured me, a middleman, you can call him a back channel, you can call him an intermediary, you can call him a confirming source. I named him for the committee. I was hesitant to do so because I feared that he would be subject to professional reprisal. Indeed, when his name surfaced, he was fired from the progressive radio show where he worked. But more importantly, by claiming that August 4th was a day in which I predicted that these emails would be devastating, I refer very specifically to a message I got from Charles Ortel, who's appeared here many times on Fox, who is someone I respect enormously as an expert on the Clinton Foundation, forwarding me information from James Rosen, one of the reporters that I respect most in terms of his meticulous methodology and his investigative reporting and coverage for Fox, predicting that these documents would be about the Clinton Foundation, which I also posited in my speech to the Southeastern Republic.
Well, and people
I think that explains those two things, but that does not mean that I learned them from Julian Assange. I have never met with, spoken with, Skyped with, FaceTimed with, or emailed Julian Assange. The exchange that I did have with WikiLeaks was supplied to the House Intelligence Committee.
And we've seen that.
Was leaked by the committee. It's exculpatory. It shows that we weren't collaborating.
All right.
Only in this atmosphere can you get a leak like that where your critics say, aha, we've got him now.
Well, you know what? We could spend an hour talking to you about this because there's so many other things about your predictions with regard to the Podesta emails and all kinds of things. We know you've testified about this. We'll continue to follow the story. But thank you for answering our questions with regard to that dinner that didn't apparently happen. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. Great to be with you.
Well, what was that? So individuals who were just going up. Oh, they were going up to police. I remember the video. They were going up to police who were just standing there of all ethnic and racial backgrounds, as far as I could tell. And they had helmets on. I mean, obviously, the people are throwing things. They don't want to get, knocked out. So they're just standing there because they wanted to separate the 20 or so white nationalists from everybody else. But it looks like the crowd got mad because they felt penned in and they didn't want there to be any barrier between them and the 20 white nationalists. Can you imagine what would have happened between those two groups? I mean, the police were trying to avoid a Charlottesville situation, which I thought that's what people complained about last year. One of the things they were upset about, and rightly so, that there was no order in the protest. It got out of control. So now the police are damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. They separate everybody. As far as I could tell, no one was seriously hurt. That's a positive. People got their views heard, and people were shouting. I mean, I didn't know you could actually go up to a police officer. I never knew this before, that you could walk up to a police officer and go within an inch of his or her face and scream obscenities. And by the way, to an African-American officer, this is what they were screaming.
You look like a member. That's how disrespectful I am. That's how disrespectful I am. We talk about disrespect. That's how disrespectful I am. You must be a member. You accept it? Do you accept it? You accept the KKK being here?
So these were individuals. Now you can't claim that an entire protest anywhere, because they'll do this to conservatives. If there are a few people in a march who are unruly or disrespectful, you can't tar the whole march. And there were various groups there yesterday. And I watched it on C-SPAN, so they tried to, I think it was C-SPAN where I was watching it, if my memory serves me correct. So there are various groups. There was a group that was Black Lives Matter, there was a group that was Antifa, and then there were just scattered other people. Okay, so now we got some clarity here. No border, no wall, no U.S. state at all. Now, this was a large group of people screaming this. Well, isn't that what we've been arguing? Isn't this what conservatives, including Donald Trump, have been pointing out for years now? That, in fact, there is a strain in this far-left movement that despises what America is. Again, America at her core is this is what they believe, and you could hear it in this chant, are horrible, awful, rotten people with a, of course, racist past, and they have, in America as we know her, must be destroyed. Isn't this the point that Trump has been made during the campaign? That we must preserve history, even the ugly parts of U.S. history. That we must preserve literature. We can't censor things with how people see things today. We can't, if you censor the past, you can't learn from the past. You don't learn from the past if you obliterate the past. Now, the Taliban goes around smashing historical relics. Priceless murals and carvings, and whether they're Buddhist or whether they're Christian or even Islamic, that don't comport with their twisted worldview. ISIS and the Taliban both do that. So this is I would say this is an evil way to go about protesting, to go about, we know what these stupid white nationalists, they're complete, utter losers, freaks with no relevance. Again, the media are giving them a platform. I'll tell you take the cameras away from this stuff, they all go away. They all go away. But how many of you think that the media play a part? I'm not talking about in Charlottesville last year, but I'm talking about yesterday, where the media play a part in giving the handful, 20, less than 20, fewer than 20, to be grammatically correct, fewer than 20, according to media reports, of these white nationalists, that the media are responsible for inflating their relevance and their exposure. 855-40-LAURA. Now, I'm not saying don't cover them at all, but my gosh, wall-to-wall coverage or what? How does this help anybody? How does this help Chicago, which had another violent weekend? How does this help a single person get a job in this country? How does it help anybody? And to scream no borders, no walls, no USA at all. At least it rhymes. I got to say, at least they're starting to rhyme again, James. Remember I was complaining that they were out of rhymes? At least they rhyme. Got to give them that. But how many of you think that the media are in part responsible, not fully, but are in part responsible for inflaming tensions in this country? Anger, upset, people's sense of unfairness. I mean, and the media will say, well, Trump's just trying to get everyone to feel angry and upset. No. Trump came out. Trump got elected in part because there was an entire swath of America who felt like they were not heard or represented, that they were made out to be horrible, evil, rotten people who didn't deserve to work in factories because it's fine to send them overseas, whose lives just frankly were considered a thing of the past to be replaced by others. That is why that's the forgotten man and woman. And it's not white, it's black, it's Hispanic, it's everyone who feel like the rules should apply across the board. Laws should be fair to black Americans, Hispanic Americans, white. You bet they should be fair to everyone. It does not give you license to swear in the face of police officers just doing their jobs. I felt so bad for these men and women standing out there. They don't get paid a lot of money. They're standing out. Many of them are working overtime. I mean, they get extra money overtime, but they're working overtime in order to just do their jobs, and they're standing there taking that abuse. 855-40-LAURA. Is that Trump causing that? Or are these some radical groups who seek to inflame tensions before a midterm election in order to get people to think everything is rigged against you because of your ethnicity, your race? You'll never get a fair shake. Niger Innis is going to address this. National spokesperson for the Congress on Racial Equality. We're going to talk to Niger about what he sees around him. Radical elements in protest movements that seek to divide America. We know what these white nationalists are all about. I mean, we know what that's obvious. But these other people who are saying no more USA. Now, exactly what does that mean? Does that mean armed revolution? Does it? Do the media even care what it means? Because they just gave a platform to 20 people who don't deserve to be heard. They have a right, a constitutional right, yeah. They don't deserve to be heard. But what about the hundreds, if not thousands of people who showed up to spew horrible hate toward innocent people who are standing there doing their jobs? And to our country, everything we've all seen, our soldiers and our airmen, our sailors, they gave their lives for our freedom and our liberty, only to have it disrespected by people who think they're the avant-garde cool people out protesting on a Sunday. Because frankly, most of them don't know any better. They haven't learned the true history of the country. They read only they're headline readers, a lot of these folks. And it's sad. Protest all you want, do what it's all covered by the First Amendment. But think about what it feels like to be a police officer standing there. 855-40-LAURA. Victor Davis Hanson's going to join us. Peter Ducey's going to stop by. And as I said, Niger Innis, we have a great Ingram angle, lots of legal developments in the Mueller investigation. We're going to unpack all of them and a lot more coming up in the state of race relations now. I know there was a poll done over the weekend about the way people view race relations. But I seem to remember that people viewed them pretty poorly during Obama. And I think part of the reason is we had the Trayvon Martin, we had the Freddie Gray, we had the Michael Brown, we had all those protests and, the tragic loss of life. But we had also a lot of property damage. We had complete chaos in St. Louis for days and days, as you recall. Burning blocks, stores destroyed, shopkeepers demoralized, looting. So what could be, helpful protest, even if it turns out that they were wrong about their underlying points, turned into just complete violent chaos. And so I think a lot of the rest of the country, they were looking at this going, what is going on? And I'll tell you what's going on, sadly, in some cases, is people don't have adequate employment. Schools are either, poorly staffed, curriculum that is not uplifting or enriching, young people feeling hopeless, helpless, sucked into gangs without adequate male role models, single mothers in very distressed positions in neighborhoods that are, as we know, we don't have to look any further than Chicago, out of control. Okay? That doesn't help race relations. It doesn't help the people inside these horrible neighborhoods that are presided over usually by Democrats. Rahm Emanuel has been running Chicago for several years as the mayor. During that period, the violence in Chicago has for years gotten worse. Down slightly from last year, or 30% from last year. That's only because last year was terrible. 69% of Americans